One day on one of the sunny days I decided to go for a ride into the forest for mushrooms. Quickly I went deep into the forest along a narrow path, barely visible. The place was clearly little visited, but, surprisingly, the mushrooms did not immediately appear. I had to walk quite far into the depths. Finally, my efforts were rewarded. I had come to an amazing place. It was the edge of a steep mountain slope with a magnificent view of the forest expanse below and a spectacular sunset. Along the edge of the cliff, opiate mushrooms had settled in numerous families on stumps and trees. I picked buckets of mushrooms in literally 15 minutes, enjoyed the setting sun and headed back. I needed to catch the last passing train to avoid spending the night in the woods. Besides, as the sun set, it began to darken quickly and it started to rain. I walked hurriedly, first through the thicket, and then finally I got to the trail. It got dark quickly. It was still about 3 kilometers to the stop. And so, the day before this outing, I watched a horror movie about 2 murderous brothers, and now in the woods I meet a figure on the trail. And it's coming straight toward me, out of the woods toward the railroad. But there were no dwellings or cottage plots in the area, just dense forest with mushrooms. Very strange. I tensed up and prepared myself, holding the knife in my fist. And now this bulky guy is approaching. I look at him. It's a fat man of 2 meters tall, walking without mushrooms and a basket. Only with a huge knife in his hand. He's coming right at me. Usually in the forest, when you meet a stranger, you exchange a few words, but with this monster, I couldn't find anything to talk about. We passed each other in silence along the narrow path. I was prepared for the worst, but it turned out okay. I can't say I was scared, but I got a little adrenaline rush. The fat man weighed at least 200 pounds. It's still a mystery what this giant was doing in the woods at night. This must be the only place for such a beast. When I came to the railway embankment at the desired kilometer, it was already dusk. There was no one at the stop except me. The train hadn't passed yet. I waited. It was raining. And after a few minutes I noticed a man in a long dark hooded cloak. Like the fat man in the woods, he didn't have any bags or packages. What kind of strange people are these that appear in the woods at nightfall? We stood there in silence. Then I leaned over my bags of mushrooms to redistribute them. And when I straightened up a couple minutes later, I almost cursed in surprise. The man in the cloak was already gleaming a few meters away from me. It was as if they had all agreed to strike terror. I was about to approach him and ask his intentions, but then the lights of an approaching train showed in the distance. Picking up my bags of mushrooms, I prepared myself for the difficult descent down the high embankment. But, to my surprise, the train passed by without slowing down. What was that? In bewilderment I looked for a few seconds after the rapidly receding lights and the clatter of iron wheels. And then looked back at my unfortunate comrade, but there was no one there. Where could he have gone? Not even a circus acrobat could have jumped into the rushing electric train, and the raincoat would not have been able to get off the steep and slippery embankment into the forest without my noticing it. While I was mentally searching for a way out of the hopeless situation, I heard the sound of an approaching train again. And luckily for me, the train was slowing down. It was another train. I climbed the iron steps into the vestibule, and the train immediately moved. Entering the car, I saw that it was almost empty. Only in the middle a drunk guy was yelling at me to get in with him. Why not? An hour on the road would pass faster in company. I went over and sat down next to him. The guy was about 35. He was sitting there, sipping murky liquor from a bottle and snacking on something rustic. We got acquainted, talked, he gave me a drink. And then a fellow traveler surprised me with a question. Why didn't your friend in a raincoat get on the train with you? I wondered what friend he was talking about. You know, the grandpa in the raincoat you were standing next to at the bus stop. He probably lives around here somewhere. At that moment, adrenaline rushed through me for the third time that evening. I knew for a fact that the strange figure in the raincoat had disappeared with the previous train and had not reappeared until I was safely on that last train. And this guy had somehow spotted it, and even saw the old man's face, I guess. That was the end of my adventure. After saying goodbye to the funny guy at the station, I got home safely. Later, telling this incident to someone I knew, I heard something similar. The acquaintance often traveled by electric train to those places and back. And in bad weather or at sunset, he too had several times seen a solitary figure in a long cloak at some deserted stops. According to him, it was definitely a woman, and she appeared sometimes at several stops in a row along the train track. Sounds like fiction, but after my experience I kind of believe him.